So step one to making your loaf happens the morning before you want to bake. I usually do it 7 o'clock in the morning, but you could go, earlier, later than that, by an hour or two, and that's up to you. So you first put some of your starter. Take the lid off first. First, put some of your starter into your glass casserole. Now you want probably about half a cup of starter in there. I've just pinched some from a levain that I made yesterday, so I'm just giving you an example here. So about half a cup of the starter. So what we're making here is a levain. It's basically a watery mix that will start to boost the fermentation, give you a big bubbly mix ready to make the dough later on today. So 7 o'clock in the morning, give or take an hour or two, you make this. So half a cup of starter, 1 cup or thereabouts of baker's flour, and 1 cup or thereabouts of water. Mix that together using your spatula, and I'll show you the consistency once I've got it mixed. So once it's mixed, it's again kind of like that thick pancake batter consistency, similar to what your starter is in the jar. So a sort of a thick mix. When you first make the levain, it isn't particularly bubbly, it's just basically the flour water mix. So by 3 or 4 o'clock or 5, I'm not exact with my sourdough. The levain that you made, levain is basically a leavener. The levain you made it early in the morning will have fermented to the point where it is bubbly and it is light and sort of foamy. You see those bubbles and foaminess in what you had previously, just a smooth batter mix. It's now bubbling up and it is ready to actually make your loaf, or add your major amount of flour to make your loaf. So now we make the dough. The ingredients are: add 3 more cups of flour, the baker's flour, 1, 2, 3. Then I add 1 cup of water initially because I want to see how wet it is. So 1 cup of water, just tap it out of the tap. Then for flavour, improve the flavour and I think the texture of your loaf, a heaped large teaspoon of fine salt. It's probably the equivalent to a couple of teaspoons in reality. It's a kid's spoon. So, I would say 2 small heaped teaspoons of salt and the same of sugar. You can use white sugar, sometimes I use raw sugar. And the sugar, the little bit of sugar, you don't taste sweetness, but it does seem to improve the loaf. And then we mix. Again, I use my spatula. Down the track we're going to be hands-on, but initially I just use the spatula. For the first mix I just use the spatula. I'll show you the consistency when I've mixed it. This mix is quite dry and having difficulty incorporating all the flour, so I'm going to add another half cup of water. I'll start with a 1/4 cup and we'll see whether that's going to be the right consistency. We're not focusing at the moment. Sorry about that. So the extra 1/4 cup was probably enough. You can see it's quite a wet, sticky dough. If you stuck your hands in it now, they would be well coated. So I don't use my hands yet. I just keep the spatula, and we don't need to knead with making my sourdough. You just need to fold this dough occasionally. But now that you've made your loaf, we put the lid on and we set it aside in a warm place. The next step is done half an hour later and every half hour for the next 3 hours, and I'll show you that shortly. Lid on, set it aside. So we've had 30 minutes since making the dough. Now is when you get your hands dirty. I've washed them completely for more than 20 seconds because we're going to put our hands into food, and this is a quick process. So all we do is we pick up the loaf and we fold it into the center. As you can see, at this stage it's very sticky and it sticks to your fingers. But basically what you're trying to do is to stretch the dough and fold it into the center. Stretch and fold it in. Stretch and fold it in. You only have to do this for maybe 20 seconds, and that's enough. As soon as you start to feel it tighten up a little bit, that's pretty much it. So the stretch and fold is done. Set it aside and do that in 30 minutes. Okay, we're another half hour in, so an hour into the fold. So this is our fold number 2. I've washed my hands thoroughly again, and we do the stretch and the pull. You see, already it's not as sticky as it was before. Still quite wet and stretchy, but not as sticky as it was, and it'll get less and less sticky during the folding process. But again, just to stretch and fold into the middle. Stretch and fold in. Stretch and fold. Stretch and fold. You do that for about 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Into the center. And that's it. Lid on, set aside again. Okay, we're up to pretty much the final stretch and fold. See how the dough is coming away from the glass a lot cleaner. And it's still quite a sticky dough, perhaps even more sticky than I wanted it to. But if it's too sticky, you can just use a bit of flour on your hands to stop it from sticking to you too much. And stretch and fold. leave it for now. And the next part is just preparing your loaf for being transferred after the full proof. Okay, now I'm going to just prepare the loaf because I've finished all of the folding. So I'm going to tip it onto the bench. So flour your bench, tip it on, and see how the dough pulls away from the glass. It should, most of the dough should just come out on its own. Lift a tiny little bit, I'll pull that out. I'm going to flour the container that it's going to go back into so that it'll be easy to get out after it's proofed. And I'm going to form my loaf. So, pulling it all together. Then I put a piece of parchment or baking paper into the container. And I'll put my folded inside down. And leave the dough to rise now for the next 2 or 3 hours. Once that's finished, it will be about 10 o'clock at night, and then I'll go to bed and I'll pop it, after it's risen a little, into the fridge for the night. So 2 hours rising, then into the fridge for the night, and I'll film again tomorrow morning when we're going to bake. That's it. So here it's had a couple of hours of rising. You can see it's filled the bowl a lot more and started rising up. And it's 10 o'clock at night, so I'm going to put it into the fridge for the night. What that does is it slows the rise down a bit overnight, and it controls the amount of fermentation so that it doesn't over ferment and over rise, and then you get it out in the morning to bake. So I'll see you again in the morning. Okay, it's early in the morning. I've got my loaf out of the fridge. I've got my oven on as high as it can go, and my cast iron pot into preheat. So I'll give it a good 10-15 minutes for it to preheat, and then I'll put my loaf in. Okay, it's in the oven. Timer set for 20 minutes with the lid on. Then I'm going to take the lid off, turn the oven down to 180, and then take and set the timer for another 20 minutes. Okay, first 20 minutes of bake is up, so I'm going to take the lid off, and there's our nicely rising loaf. And now I want to leave the lid off to brown it and give a nice crust. So I turn the oven down to 180 so that it doesn't get too brown while it cooks in the centre. And set the timer for another 20 minutes. Okay, the second 20 minutes of the bake is done. I'm going to steam the camera up here. So let's get our loaf out. Looks nice. I'll turn it out and we'll see if the bottom's cooked. So I've lifted it out using this paper, and then you just peel the paper back. Bottom looks cooked. Give it a knock. If it sounds hollow, it's done. That is our baked bread. Have a look. And now you have to leave it for at least an hour or two to cool down before you cut it. Otherwise, the steam that's built up inside doesn't get the chance to finish cooking the dough. So you really need to leave it for a good hour, 2 if possible, before you're tempted to cut it.